Much for joining today. My name is Megan Shirley. I work at the Forestry Commission and I am the Incentives Manager for the Tree Production Capital Grant, or TPCG. I've also got Jack Clough on the call, who's Grant Manager for the team, and he's going to run through some of the slides today with myself. And my colleague Noemi is on the call and she'll be monitoring the chat as we go through. So just a quick outline of what we're going to be covering today. We're going to start with some background and kind of the scope of the grant. We'll then move on to the eligibility criteria. I'm then going to talk you through how to prepare your application. And then at the end, after all of the slides, there'll be a chance for questions and answers at the end. There's quite a lot of information on the slides we're going to present today. Don't worry too much about making loads of notes. A lot of the information we're covering is available on gov.uk, and we'll also share the recording of the webinar afterwards, so you can always go back if there's anything that you've missed or can't remember afterwards. I think that's all of the housekeeping, so I'm going to hand over to Jack now, who's going to run through the first few slides with us.
Thanks, Megan. Are you happy to move on to? Brilliant.
Yeah.
So the Tree Production Capital Grant is funded by Government's Nature for Climate Fund, and a substantial chunk of this has been earmarked to achieve the objectives of the England Trees Action Plan, or ETAP. The government has ambitions to substantially increase tree planting rates by the end of this Parliament, and more recently it's also set legally binding targets to increase tree and woodland cover by 2050. In order to meet targets domestically, this will require a corresponding increase in UK production of tree planting material. And so the TPCG has been set up in response to this challenge, and it aims to boost the capacity of the domestic tree production sector. Next slide, please, Megan. Thank you. So what is the TPCG? It's a 50% match-funded capital grant administered by the Forestry Commission. It provides funding to help tree nurseries and seed suppliers of various sizes to invest in projects which will improve, expand, automate, or mechanise their operations. It's been designed to enable applicants to increase the quantity, quality, diversity, or biosecurity of domestic supply. And lastly, it's been designed to complement the Tree Production Innovation Fund, which is another Forestry Commission grant with similar objectives supporting innovation or R&D projects. The next slide, please. Thank you. So through previous rounds, we've committed over £5.5 million in TPCG grant funding to support 81 successful applicants. And through this round, up to an additional £2.5 million in grant support will be made available to support successful projects. Through the TPCG, you're able to apply for up to £175,000 in funding to cover up to 50% of project or equipment costs. In order to prevent the money from being hoovered up by lots of larger bids, we've split the funding into two streams. So you've got Stream A for projects with a total value between £10,000 and £100,000, and Stream B for projects valued above £100,000. Projects must have a minimum total cost of £10,000 to be eligible for funding, i.e. you need to be applying for a £5,000 contribution from the TPCG toward a project with a total value of £10,000. The maximum contribution you could apply for from the TPCG in any given round, as I just said, is £175,000, and that would be for a project valued at £350,000 or more. So you could, in theory, apply for a £175,000 grant contribution towards, say, a £500,000 or £1 million project, if you've got something quite grand in scale in mind. Applicants can submit no more than one bid during each funding round. So if you've applied to us before, to TPCG, you're very welcome to submit another bid under this round. Next slide, please, Megan. So what's different for round 3? So previously we've awarded agreements spanning multiple financial years. Under the current round of funding, we're only able to issue agreements spanning the 24-25 financial year. So that's the 1st of April 2024 through to the 27th of March 2025. The reason for this is the Nature for Climate Fund, from which the TPCG funding is sourced, runs to March 2025, and we don't have TPCG budget confirmed beyond this date. The reason the application window this year is slightly earlier to previous years is to allow successful applicants a full financial year in which to deliver projects, and in some cases to procure big pieces of kit. We do appreciate that this clashes with a busy period for nurseries. We haven't just done this to make life difficult, it's just to allow those who are successful longer lead times for their projects and equipment. We've also made some changes to the application form, and these include less emphasis on capacity to make sure that producers of small volumes of large trees for things like amenity or urban planting are in scope. And we've put greater emphasis on deliverability. So as I've mentioned, successful applicants will need to have all their project work completed by March 2025, and we're not able to roll funding over into the next financial year. So there are now questions on both the deliverability and team and track record, which Megan will cover in some of the later slides. And then lastly, we've also revised our guidance to applicants document, which you can find on the .gov page. Next slide, please, Megan. So what costs are eligible? This slide gives an overview of what is eligible, so what the grant can and can't be used to pay for. Eligible costs include those used for purchasing equipment and machinery, delivery and shipping costs for items, and staff costs associated with construction of expanded facilities, installation of items on your premises, and the likes. Ineligible costs, also shown on screen, include funding for work that's already been carried out or will have been carried out before a grant agreement has been signed and returned to us, ongoing maintenance costs for items or equipment, staff training costs, seed or sapling costs, and any consumables such as compost or fertiliser. And then lastly, just to say the grant can't be used for the purchasing of land. Next slide, please. So this slide gives a few examples of the kinds of projects that the TPCG will support. It's by no means exhaustive, and there will be lots of items or projects eligible for funding that aren't listed on the slide. So examples of projects could include purchases of intelligent transplanting systems to enable automation, improvements to production infrastructure and irrigation systems, and water treatment or refrigeration equipment to improve biosecurity. We've also recently published a case study of one project funded by the TPCG so far. So Naomi, if you could drop a link to that in the Teams chat now so that people can have a look through if they're interested. And we're hoping to have a second case study published later this week, so do keep your eyes out for that. Next slide, please. So in order to be eligible for funding, applicants must be UK-based and will need to demonstrate how the grant will be used to increase English tree, seed or sapling supply. The reason behind the English supply specification is that the funding is derived from the Nature for Climate Fund in support of the England Trees Action Plan, or ETAP, as I've mentioned. So applicants from devolved authorities can apply, but you'll need to clearly demonstrate in your application how the funding will be used to enhance seed or sapling supply to England specifically. The grant is open to forestry nurseries, as well as those which produce amenity, fruit or nut trees. New or existing nurseries can apply. As I've mentioned, previous applicants, whether successful or not, can apply. And Forestry England and Forest Research are not eligible for funding under the Tree Production Capital Grant. Next slide, please. This slide lists those who we suspect will be likely to apply to the TPCG, but again, it's not exhaustive. So if you're not on the list, it doesn't mean that you're ineligible. And if you are interested in applying and have concerns about eligibility, please do get in touch at the address that we'll leave at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. Brilliant. So that covers the grant objectives and eligibility criteria. So I'll now hand you back over to Megan, who'll run through how to go about filling out your application form.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jack. So yeah, as Jack said, I'm going to run through basically how to apply. But kind of taking a step back from that, there are a few things we wanted to kind of run through that you should consider before you start writing your application. So first off, there's a lot of information about the grant on our gov.uk page, and as Jack mentioned earlier, we've revamped our application guidance page this year. So I'd really encourage you to take a look at that, make sure you understand all of the information and the process before writing your application. Noemi, if you could pop the link to the guidance in the chat, that would be great. As we've mentioned already, so the grant is 50% funding. So you'll also need to consider where you'll be sourcing the other 50% match funding from. The grant is also paid in arrears, so you need to think about, you need to make sure that you've got enough funds to pay for items initially before you claim the 50% funding back from us. You're welcome to claim several times throughout the year to help with cash flow, but just think through how that's going to work before applying. It's also wise to speak to suppliers and contractors to get quotes so you can give confidence that your proposal is good value for money and that you know that you're applying for the right costs. And also check with contractors that your plans are realistic within the funding period. So, for example, if you're wanting to buy a big piece of bespoke equipment from overseas, you'll want to check that that can be ordered, built and delivered by 27th of March next year, and probably build in a bit of contingency as well. Any research that you do into kind of costs or timings, I'd really encourage you to put them in your application. The panel will look favourably on applications which are well thought through and where you've clearly explored the kind of value for money and deliverability. Okay. So this slide just gives a high level overview of how to apply. Basically, you'll need to complete a TPCG application form and a finance spreadsheet. The forms can be found on our gov.uk page. I think that may already be in the chat, but the link is on the screen now. All questions in the application form are mandatory, so I would encourage you to double check that everything's filled in before submitting. And questions do have a set word limit, so just make sure that you don't exceed that. Your application form and finance spreadsheet should be submitted to the TPCG email no later than 5 to midnight on the 30th of January. So the application form is made up of 9 parts, which sounds like quite a lot, but some of the sections are just information or tick boxes. I'm going to walk you through the application now. So the first section is application detail. You'll be asked for a few basic details at the top of this section, including your organisation name. I just wanted to remind people to use the legal name of the organisation to who in this section. So basically, this is the organisation with which the agreement will be made if you're successful and to which claims will be paid. So it's really important to get that bit right. If you have a different working name, please just pop that in brackets so we know. You'll also be asked for a short project description outlining what you would like to use the grant to purchase or develop. And then at the bottom of this, at the bottom of this section, there's then a list of eligibility criteria. You need to satisfy each of these criteria for your application to go through to the evaluation stage. So read each of them carefully, make sure that you do fulfill the criteria, and then fill in the relevant checkbox. Okay, so part 2 of the application is the assessment questions. So this section includes 8 questions, and your answer to these questions are what the evaluation panel will use to score your application. Each of these questions has a 250-word limit, and this year all questions are equally weighted. I'm going to run through each of these questions. There's quite a lot of information here, but hopefully it's helpful for you to just understand what the panel will be looking for from you. So question 1 asks, what effect will the project have on your future production capacity? So this question was previously double weighted, but it's single weighted this year. So as Jack said, we've got a bit less emphasis on capacity this round. In this question, I would really encourage you to use numbers to illustrate your answer and just give as much detail as possible. Also, if you buy in trees to grow on, please tell us where you source them from. So do you source them from the UK or are you importing those? At the bottom of this question, we'll ask you to give an estimate for the number of additional saplings or quantity of seed that the project will enable you to produce annually. We're looking for a number here rather than a percentage increase. So I've put an example on the screen. So 50,000 more saplings, for example. Question 2 asks, what effect will the project have on the diversity of species you produce? Again, please be as specific as possible, and where you can, outline the species which the project will support the production of. Question 3 asks, how will the project affect the efficiency of your sapling production? So, for example, it might be that your proposals will reduce your labour requirements or reduce reliance on inefficient processes. Giving examples here can be really helpful. So, for example, you may say that it currently takes 4 members of staff to operate an old piece of machinery, and by upgrading that machinery, it'll only take 2 staff members to operate that. So if you can use examples, that's really helpful for the panel. Question 4 asks what effect the project will have on your resilience. We're looking here for the resilience of your organisation and its tree or seed production rather than kind of wider resilience. You may want to consider things like resilience to pests and diseases, to weather and climate change, or resilience to future market changes. Question 5 is all about value for money. Here we want you to outline how much the proposed work will cost and explain how it represents good use of public money. The evaluation panel will use your finance spreadsheet when reviewing your response to this question, and I'll come on to that shortly. So we want you to explain how you've estimated your costs and what you've done to ensure best value for money. So this may include things like whether you've weighed up different options, whether you've compared different quotes from suppliers, or perhaps if you're contributing some of your own resources to the project. In your answer, you'll also need to identify the source of your match funding. And any match funding must not be sourced from another Nature for Climate Fund funded grant. So question 6 asks whether or not the proposals are environmentally sustainable. Basically, we don't want to support projects that are likely to have adverse environmental impacts. So things you could include here are things like whether your proposal will reduce waste or perhaps reduce chemical use on your nursery. Question 7 asks about your team and track record. So this used to be part of a single question on deliverability, but it's been split into 2 for this round, as Jack mentioned earlier. On this particular question, we're wanting you to demonstrate that your organisation or project team have the skills and experience to deliver the project and to realise the benefits of the project into the future. If you don't have direct nursery experience, so you're setting a nursery up for the first time, perhaps, we'd be looking for you to highlight other relevant skills or training or show how you're using external expertise. Then finally, question 8 asks about deliverability. Here we're looking for you to explain how you will ensure the project is delivered to plan and on time. As Jack was mentioning, the funding for this round ends at the end of March 2025, and we can't roll any money over beyond that. So we want confidence that you can deliver your project within that time frame and to a high quality. So in this question, if you have any rough timelines for your project, those would be great to include here. If you've looked into lead-in times or delivery times, mention that here so that the panel know you've done your research and know that you know what you're doing. And we also ask about risks in this question. So we want to see that you've considered the possible risks to your project and have factored those into your planning and have mitigations in place. So those are the 8 assessed questions. This slide briefly covers how those questions will be scored. So each answer will be scored on a scale of 0 to 4. So where 0 is unacceptable and 4 is excellent. Each panel member will score your responses separately. We then combine those to get an average for each question. After averaging, if your application scores 0 for any of the scored questions or scores less than 16 out of 32 overall, it will be unsuccessful. If the round is oversubscribed, we may only be able to award the highest scoring applications, even if you do exceed that 16 out of 32 threshold. So it just depends on the competition. As I've mentioned, so the next section is about finances. And as I've mentioned already, you'll need to submit a finance spreadsheet alongside your application form. This details every item or piece of work you're seeking funding for and will form the budget if you're successful. I've put a few pointers on the screen here. I think most of them I've covered, so make sure you're only applying for 50% funding for each item, seek quotes or do your research before applying. And all items must be received and work completed by 27th March next year. The last point on here is about VAT. We do get quite a lot of questions about this. So you can only claim for irrecoverable VAT. So please reflect that when you're filling in your finance spreadsheet. So put another way, if you can claim back VAT from HMRC, you shouldn't be including that VAT in your proposal or in any claims that you submit to us. But yeah, it can be a really tricky one because whether you include VAT or not depends on your personal position. So if you do have questions, please do get in touch with us on that one. This just gives an example of what your finance spreadsheet may look like. So each of the items needs to be detailed. You need to give the total cost of those items and then how much funding you're applying for those items. The grant contribution will percentage will automatically calculate, and you just need to check that that doesn't exceed 50%. There's also a box which will summarise the cost and the applied for cost. Please check that that looks right before applying, as that will become your overall budget for the project if you're successful. Please also check that your costs fit within the criteria that Jack outlined earlier. So your total cost should be over £10,000 and the total applied for cost should be under £175,000. But all of those details are on the gov.uk website, so you can double check those. Parts 4 to 9 of the application form contain lots of information which you basically just need to read through before submitting. In part 7, there are a series of declarations. So read through each of those, check you understand and agree to them, and then tick the boxes for each of those. Like the eligibility criteria, you need to have ticked all of those declarations in order to go through to the evaluation stage. So do double check that. So once you're happy with everything, once you've read through, made sure that you haven't missed any sections, you'll need to sign the form in part 10. To sign it, you can either add a digital e-signature. You can normally do that through Adobe or whatever your PDFs opening on your computer, or you can print, sign and scan a copy of the last page. Unfortunately, we're not able to accept typed signatures. Also, please make sure that the person signing the form matches the person outlined in part 1 of the form. Once you're happy with everything, you can submit your application by email to the TPCG email address, which is on the screen. So what happens next? So as I've said, the deadline for applications is 5 to midnight on 30th of January. We'll do an initial check of all the applications for any missing information and to check you fulfill the eligibility criteria. It's worth looking out for any emails at this point, as we may come back to you for that information. So do keep an eye on your inboxes. Once you've kind of passed those initial checks, the applications will be sent to the panel and they'll be reviewing those applications in February. They'll then meet to collate their scores and make final decisions. We'll then aim to let you know the outcome of your application by 8th of March, and for successful applications, we'll start to issue agreements at that point. In some cases, we may come back to you with an offer in principle. This basically means that the panel want more information or want you to edit your application in some way before offering you an agreement. Again, keep an eye on your inboxes, and the quicker you can respond to any such requests, the quicker we can then issue you with an agreement. So do keep an eye out for those emails. Because the funding is just for the 2024-2025 financial year, any successful projects will start on 1st of April or once your agreement is signed. But this is my final slide, and I just wanted to quickly discuss how the grant works if you are successful, and how the payments and reporting work. As I mentioned earlier, you can submit claims throughout the year if that's going to help with your cash flow. We just ask that you try to claim for a few items at a time to reduce the amount of admin. The grant is paid in arrears, and you need to have received items or completed work in order to claim for it. When you claim, you'll need to provide us with evidence of spend for all items and all activity. Usually this is an invoice or receipt, but if you're claiming for internal staff time, that could be a timesheet. For any work that exceeds £1,000, we'll need to see photo evidence of that work. Once we're happy with everything in your claim, we'll pay by BACS transfer, and the final deadline for claims will be 27th March 2025. once you've submitted your final claim and finished your project, 3 to 6 months after that point, you'll need to complete a post-implementation report, and that will just detail how the project went and what impact it's had. And we share a template with you for that. So that's the end of our slides today. So we've got plenty of time for questions. As I said, there's a lot of information there, but most of it's on gov.uk, and we will be sharing this recording afterwards. I think Noemi's been keeping an eye on the chat. I'm just going to stop sharing, I think, so I can see you all. Yeah, are you happy to kick off with some questions, Noemi?
Definitely. The chat's been a bit busy, and Jack and I have answered a couple of questions, so I'm just going to ask the ones that we haven't gotten back to yet. So the first question is from Amanda, and she's asking, what examples of match funding can people provide, please? We are a community interest company and don't have as much money.
So I wonder whether there's actually anyone else on the call who could give any tips on match funding that they've secured. You'd be welcome to use, so some people just use their own reserves. You'd be welcome to use other forms of grant funding as long as that grant funding isn't funded by the Nature for Climate Fund. Jack, can you think of any other specific examples?
I think for installation of equipment, I think we've allowed staff time in the past to count as match funding, but we need evidence of timesheets for that, essentially, to prove that it's actually been carried out.
Great. Yeah, but if anyone has can share any advice on the chat, that would be really helpful. If anyone has their own experience of securing match funding.
Thanks, Megan. Amanda had a second question, which is related, is whether the Farming in Protected Landscapes grant be used as match funding. I'm not entirely sure if that's funded by the Nature for Climate Fund. So, Amanda, I'll check for you and let you know if that's a possibility.
Thanks, Noemi. Yeah, I think so. The match funding can't come from a Nature for Climate Fund funded grant, and also we just need to make sure that we're not double funding against any other grants. So it would be that the other grant would only be that other 50%.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So Gillian has left. Jack answered Sarah's question. Can part of the match funding be volunteer hours in the work, for example, putting up a polytunnel? I think Jack just answered that question.
I think for volunteers, it might be slightly different. I might have to take that offline for you, Mark, because they're not salaried in the same way as full-time employees. If you drop us an email at tpcg@forestrycommission.gov.uk, we'll get back to you on that. And if anyone else is interested in the response to that question, please do get in touch.
There have been a few questions about getting quotes, one of which Jack has answered from Rodney. How many quotes required per item, and if an item is unique to one supplier, is one quote acceptable? And Jack, you've answered that at least 3 quotes would be preferable. But just to say that you do not need to submit the quotes with your application form. So it's not a requirement, it's more just for you to know how much that item will cost, so your finance spreadsheet is as accurate as possible. And a similar question from Amanda, is there a value above which more than one quote is required? I don't think we have a limit. No.
No, as Noemi's explained, there are no kind of strict rules around getting quotes. It's more about you making sure that you've done your research and kind of are confident in the costs that you're applying for, basically.
Thanks, Megan. Amanda asked again, how long does it take for a claim to be reimbursed? So we aim to pay all claims within 30 days of receiving a completed claim. So yeah, let's say a month. We try to be quicker than that, but the 1 month is our sort of own target deadline.
We also, I'll just say on that yeah, it makes a huge difference whether you submit the claim correctly the first time, because yeah, you can lose a lot of time if you submit the claim with something missing or a form not signed and we have to do back and forth. So it's worth trying to get claim forms right the first time, because we'll be able to pay them much quicker.
Yeah, that's great. Someone else asked, as a new entrant nursery, are we eligible if we only incorporate this month? I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You would be fine to put in an application. And a second question, as a new entrant, would we be encouraged to apply for Stream A?
So the streams, you don't need to specify the streams. That's more of an internal process that we follow based on the value of your application. So Jack, correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but I think just apply for what you want to apply for. Don't worry too much about it. And yeah, the stream is just determined by the value of your application.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is so Stream A is the slightly lower value project, whereas Stream B is for a project valued in excess of 100,000. So if you are a new organisation, we'd want to see that you have a team or experience in place, or that your project is deliverable enough to make sure that you're making good use of the large amount of money that you could potentially apply for under Stream B. So you'd be welcome to apply for either stream, but like I say, yeah, you might need to try to think about how you can demonstrate confidence that you've got a project that's deliverable and will result in a successful nursery that's producing trees at the end of it.
Great, thank you, Jack. Next question is from Edward. Are security costs such as fencing, alarms, etc. for new infrastructure eligible for grant funding? Yes.
Yeah, we have funded things like that before.
Yeah. Can you fund an item through financial leasing? I don't know that one.
That might be one for the inbox.
Yeah, I
Rodney.
think if you can email us with a few more details. We have come across queries like this before, and I can't think off the top of my head.
I think from memory, I think it gets quite complicated because you're then technically not the owner of the capital item. So if something were to go wrong, you'd then have the Forestry Commission and the financer fighting over the asset or getting you to try and sell it. But yeah, email the inbox and we'll come back to you on that, because I can't recall off the top of my head.
Do you want to jump in, Rodney?
Just to say that financial leasing, you can technically own the item at the end of the financial lease period. It depends if it's HP or, there can be a system where you have the right to buy the item back at the end of the financial period.
Thanks, Rodney.
I think that's one for the inbox. Yeah, if you could email us your question, we'll do some research and get back to you. That's okay. Lovely. Next question from Will. Is there a list of eligible tree/plant species that will qualify?
There's no specification for the species. The panel would probably be looking for species that would be likely to be planted in kind of woodland creation schemes or perhaps urban planting schemes, rather than anything that was kind of too niche and specific to like more of a horticultural market. But yeah, all species would be eligible essentially.
Thank you, Maria, who commented that farming and protected landscapes can't be matched with any other government funding. So, Amanda, that's the answer to your question. Thank you so much, Maria. And then the question from Sarah, when will we be notified if we have been successful in our application?
So that's 8th of March is what we're aiming for. Yeah, it should be on or around that date.
A question from Dan. With it being a capital grant, surely the match funding needs to be money because the other 50% of the costs of the equipment needs to be paid for.
Yes, I see what you mean. That so you do, as I said at the beginning, you do need to have the money up front to be able to buy the items. So yeah, that is a consideration when thinking about the source of your other match funding. As I said, because you can claim throughout the year, so we wouldn't expect you to be able to buy everything in your proposal before claiming back. But yeah, that is a very good point and something to kind of think about.
Definitely. Thank you, Megan. Is there any driver for sort of climate change trees having a preference over traditional natives? I don't think that there is a preference in our case.
I wouldn't say there's a preference. I think if you're growing trees because you see a market for them as because of climate change resilience, I would explain that in that question. Just it helps the panel to understand the kind of your reasoning for growing those species and why you think that there'll be a market for them. But I don't think they would have any particular preferences on that.
Thank you, Megan. Next question is from Sam. Where applicable, do any relevant permissions/consents, for example, planning permissions or forestry EIA, need to be in place before application or before a specific date?
No, I would say that when you're thinking about deliverability, yeah, I would kind of build in contingency for getting those planning applications approved, because I know that we've had people have their kind of projects delayed by that sort of thing. And as I said, the March next year is a very strict deadline for us. So yeah, we don't need you to have them in place before you apply or anything, but you just need to think through your timelines quite carefully, I think.
Thank you, Megan. Next question from Alice. Do we have to be signed up as a business or an organization? I'm an individual starting a new business. You do not need to be signed up as a business, I don't think, to be eligible.
I don't think so. I think if you could show that you were a sole trader.
We'd probably want to see or have an understanding of how you were intending to set up as a small business as part of your application, just so the panel can sort of see whether you want to continue as a sole trader or have ambition to become a registered business or organization.
Yeah, I think that's right as well. Next question is from Mark. Is there a maximum size of tree that is eligible, i.e. is increasing semi-mature tree production eligible? Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yes, there is no minimum or maximum size eligibility criteria. All tree nurseries are eligible. I think that is the end of the questions in the chat. Does anybody else have anything else they would like to ask?
Feel free to put your hand up if there's something you want to ask as well. And thanks, Mark, for that information about the Community Tree Nursery Collective.
Oh, a question from Rodney. Must nurseries be FRM registered? No, you don't. You do not need to have an FRM registration number to be eligible. Would hedging suppliers qualify? Yes.
So I think
No?
I think it would depend whether you were only supplying hedging. Jack, do you have any thoughts on that one? I think we have had this discussion before.
I think if it's just to supply hedging, I think you'd be unlikely to be awarded funding. If you're a hedging supplier who is looking to diversify into producing trees for either forestry, so whips, or larger amenity trees or fruit and nut trees like standards for urban planting or for agroforestry, then you'd be very welcome to apply. But I think if it was just straight hedging, then I think probably not.
Any more? Give it a minute or so just to see if anyone answers. Perhaps whilst I just give you a minute in case there's any other questions, I'll just mention that our seed sourcing grant is also open for applications at the moment, and that closes on the 13th of February, I believe. We're having a how to apply webinar for the seed sourcing grant next Wednesday. So if anyone is interested in going down that route, then please do have a look at the information on that and sign up to the webinar.
I'll post a link for that webinar just now. We've had a question from Mark in the chat.
So about
yeah.
So if the focus is ought trees, is that okay? Yes, that would be fine. I think that maybe links to Rodney's question below. So to supply forestry, you must be FRM registered. I think perhaps, so I think some of the fruit tree suppliers and those kind of suppliers may not necessarily need to be. But yeah, as you said, most people would need to be.
Is there a case study forthcoming for a successful consortium application? We do not have one in the pipeline. No.
I'm not sure we've actually had any consortium applications before. Can anyone? They're definitely eligible. You're welcome to apply in partnership with others, as long as you can put forward a lead organisation who would be on the agreement and kind of take responsibility for the grant. But yeah, I can't think of any examples.
Don't think we've had any yet, no. Just another question from Sam. Do successful producers need to be achieving ready to plant or plant healthy standards?
That's not a specific criteria. Obviously, if you can demonstrate things like that in your application, I think the panel will look more favourably on you. But yeah, it's not a criteria.
Any more questions? Yes, Caroline, fencing would be an eligible item. Fionn is asking, are you running any more rounds of funding in the future? The answer is we're not sure yet. Yeah, this is the only certain one for now. So if you're thinking about putting in an application, please do it now. Liam is asking, do you have to be selling / providing trees by March 2025?
I think you'd need to be growing them by then. No, I don't think you'd need to be selling them by then, because I think if you're a new nursery, you'd have to use the time to set up before you could be sowing. So we wouldn't expect you to actually have the trees grown by then. But in the capacity question, it is really useful to kind of tell the panel what your predictions are. So if you're not going to be selling or providing trees by March 2025, it's helpful to tell the panel what your kind of forecast is for the next, 3 to 5 years or whatever.
Any more questions? Keith is asking, we're selling specimen trees. Is that okay? Mainly types of oak.
Yeah, that should be fine. Yeah, trees for kind of amenity or urban planting or those kind of things are within scope.
Thank you, Kirsten. I think we'll stay here until 3 o'clock. But if there are no more questions.
Yeah, I'll just see if anything else comes in. Yeah, you can always contact us at the TPCG email address. Yeah, it's monitored by all of our teams, so we'll pick up any inquiries. So if you think of anything after the webinar, do let us know. Do you need to seek out your own buyers? From Stephen, yes, you will. So yeah, it's your responsibility to kind of market your trees and find buyers for them. Again, that kind of thing is useful to include in your application if you are confident that you've got buyers for your trees, especially if you're a new nursery. Telling the panel what your kind of strategy is for that is always really helpful. But yeah, that would be your responsibility. Thanks for popping the email address in there, Noemi.
No problem.
I think we may have got to the end of the questions.
I think so.
I think we can probably draw it to a close.
Yeah. Okay, lovely. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, contact us on our email address if you have any further questions, and we'll be very happy to help. And we're really looking forward to seeing your applications, hopefully. It's great to see so many of you interested in the grant. Lovely.
Thank you all.
Enjoy your
Thanks
afternoon.
all. Bye.